They said the job was easy, a formality, a paycheck for a warm body in a uniform. That's how they pitched it to me during the interview, and God help me, I believed them. I was young, broke, and too naive to question why the Vatican would need a man like me, an outsider with no real training, to guard one of the holiest places on earth. They told me I'd be stationed in the less traveled wings, places tourists didn't wander into, corridors closed for renovation or archival reasons. My only duty, make sure the gates were locked after midnight, patrol once or twice, and stay awake until dawn. That was it. Easy money. I should have known then, when something sounds that easy inside a place built on centuries of blood and secrets, it's a lie. The first night, I walked those marble halls with my little radio hissing static at my belt and a flashlight in my hand that seemed too weak for the job. The air was thick, as if it had settled in those corridors and refused to leave. Dust motes hung in the beam of my light, and every step echoed against the stone like I was trespassing, even though I wore their badge and their uniform. I passed statues of saints whose names I didn't know, their eyes gouged into smooth marble, but in the half-light they seemed alive, like they were watching me rather than blessing me. I told myself it was fatigue or nerves. I told myself statues don't lean forward when you look away. The first time I noticed something wrong was near the archive wing, a place I was explicitly told never to enter. A black iron gate sealed it off, heavy and rusting, with a cross welded at its center. But that night, candles burned beyond it, not the electric kind they set up for tourists, but real wax candles, tall and dripping, lined along the stone floor. Their flames flickered in a rhythm like breathing. I froze. No one should have been in there. No priest, no staff. That corridor had been closed for decades, they said, but the wax was fresh, the light alive. I thought about calling it in over the radio, but something told me not to. Some instinct whispered, if you mention it, you won't leave this place. I should have stopped then. I should have turned back to my post, ignored it all, collected my paycheck and gone home. But I didn't. Curiosity is a curse, and mine outweighed my common sense. I lingered there, staring at the gate, until I noticed the paper slip wedged between the bars. It looked like parchment, old and yellowed, folded into quarters. My heart hammered as I reached through and pulled it out. I expected Latin prayers, maybe a warning to keep away. Instead, I found the first of the rules, written in cramped ink that looked more like scratches than letters. Do not look directly at the guests. Guests, that word struck me harder than any sermon. Who was coming? The Vatican doesn't call tourists guests. Guests implies invitation. It implies belonging. I read it again, feeling the paper tremble in my hand. I looked around, half expecting someone to appear behind me, but the corridor was empty. Empty, except for the candlelight that continued to flicker in that strange, steady rhythm, as if reminding me it was alive. I stuffed the slip into my pocket, telling myself I'd hand it over to a supervisor in the morning. But even then, I knew I wouldn't. Some knowledge stains the mind the second you touch it. This was one of those things. The paper already felt like contraband, like it was binding me to something ancient and unseen. When I walked back through the halls, every statue seemed closer than before. Their stone hands reached slightly forward, their necks tilted in ways I swore hadn't been carved like that. I aimed my flashlight at St. Bartholomew, and in the shifting shadows, his face looked flayed, skinless, grinning. My knees nearly gave. I whispered a prayer I hadn't spoken since I was a child, and still the image burned in my eyes long after the light moved away. That was when the silence set in. I hadn't noticed it before, but the basilica is never truly silent. Even at night, there's always some trace of sound, air ducts, distant footsteps, the shuffle of robes. But that night, after I read the slip, it was silence so complete it pressed against my ears. My breathing sounded too loud. My heartbeat felt like it was echoing down the hall. And under that silence, I swear I heard the faint scrape of stone moving against stone. I told myself I was being paranoid. That's what they all say, isn't it? But paranoia is just seeing the truth too early. I returned to my post by the locked doors, sat down on the wooden bench they'd provided, and tried to force myself to stay still. The paper burned in my pocket, heavier than lead, and I couldn't shake the word guests. Guests arriving where? Guests of who? I wanted to ask, but there was no one to ask, and my radio, though I clicked it on 3 times, gave nothing but static, as if the frequency itself was being smothered. The hours stretched long. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. I kept walking the halls just to keep my blood moving. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of my flashlight, a smudge in the corner of my vision. But no, it was real. One of the statues in the far alcove had turned. It faced the opposite direction now, angled toward the closed iron gate. My throat closed up, and I staggered back. I wanted to convince myself I was wrong, that I hadn't remembered it correctly, but I had walked this hall a dozen times already that night. I knew which way it had been facing, and now it was looking toward the gate, toward the candlelight, as if waiting for someone. I didn't sleep when dawn came. I sat there, trembling, watching the light filter through stained glass until another guard came to relieve me. He looked at me like I was pale, feverish, but he said nothing. They don't talk much, the others. Their eyes are always down, their hands always clasped. They avoid conversation the way normal men avoid confession. When I asked him casually about the iron gate, he shook his head once, almost imperceptibly, and muttered, "Don't ask questions you don't want answered." His voice cracked. That was all. But I can't stop. I know I should, but the slip is still in my possession. I read it every night before I report to duty, as if I'm trying to make sense of it. The ink looks darker now than when I first saw it, as if it's seeping deeper into the parchment. And sometimes, when the halls are quiet and the statues are listening, I think I can hear faint voices beyond the gate, chanting in Latin I can almost, but not quite, understand. They're not praying. It sounds closer to invitation. A welcome, for who I don't yet know. But the word guests rattles in my skull, and I fear I'm about to find out. I should have left the slip where it was, but it's too late now. The first rule has already claimed me, and I know the guests are coming. I spend the whole day pretending the paper slip is a prank. It would be easy to dismiss it as some leftover superstition. An old guard hazing the new hire, a joke written on parchment to give the corridors a haunted feel. But that excuse collapses the moment I step into the shower. Steam threads through the room like incense from a thurible, curling in patterns too deliberate to be accidental. And when I wipe the mirror with my towel, the words are there again. Do not look directly at the guests. I never wrote them, but they appear pale and insistent, as though pressed from the other side of the glass. I wipe harder. They return. I tell myself I'm exhausted, but my reflection looks more awake than me, and I don't like the way its eyes hold the phrase longer than mine. I delay leaving. I dress slowly, fold socks, polish boots, anything to drag the clock back. But time won't cooperate. It hurries toward night. My shift calls me, and like a fool, I answer. I tuck the slip back into my pocket, not to hand it in, not to show anyone, but to keep it close. I want to believe it will protect me. Deep down, I know it only binds me. The second night begins wrong before it begins. My radio test clicks on, and instead of the usual static, a chant comes through, low and broken, in Latin that doesn't sound right. The syllables are twisted, as if a throat not meant for human language is forcing the sounds into shape. I shut the radio off, turn it on again. Static, then the chant returns. I switch it off for good, pocket it, and try not to think about how relieved I feel not to hear it anymore. My flashlight, when I test it, feels heavier than yesterday, as though the batteries are swollen with something other than charge. At the Basilica gate, the sergeant nods me through. His eyes slide away. He doesn't ask how my first night went, doesn't ask if I saw anything. He stamps the log with a hand too practiced, too quick, and I notice the faint tremor in his wrist. It dawns on me. They don't want to know, not because they disbelieve, but because believing is worse. The halls swallow me whole. I pass the pieta and keep my eyes fixed on the floor tiles because even marble feels predatory tonight. The archive wing waits where I left it, but the gate that was locked last night now hangs ajar by 2 fingers. No keys, no sign of tampering, just open. Fresh wax scrapes trail across the stone floor like pale scabs leading deeper inside. My throat tightens, but cowardice is sometimes smarter than courage. I don't touch the gate. I don't step past it. I turn my body to face it and let my eyes linger instead on the polished brass sign at my left. Archivum Apostolicum. The Latin steadies me. The candles beyond breathe in and out, inhaling light, exhaling shadow. Their glow doesn't flicker, It pulses, the way a chest does when lungs rise and fall. I obey the first rule by clinging to reflections. I won't look straight ahead. I catch them only in the gloss of reliquary glass and polished marble. In those reflections, shapes glide across the stone, tall, taller than statues, taller than doorways. They move with the patience of clergy and the hunger of wolves. Their vestments hang too straight, like gravity has chosen them as its beloved. Their faces, or where faces should be, are hollows that refuse light. The glass fogs as my breath hits it, and for a heartbeat I think I'm imagining it, until I see four silhouettes fog with mine. Each one places its halo of condensation exactly where a mouth should be. And when I inhale, they inhale. When I exhale, they exhale. I want to scream, but the sound would make me turn, and turning would be disobedience. I take a slow step back, then another. My heartbeat sets a rhythm. Do not look, do not look, do not look. The glass listens. But then one of them tilts, just enough to acknowledge me. A gesture that could mean greeting or warning or appraisal. I almost glance up. Almost. A smaller figure breaks away and approaches. Its sleeve shifts, and beneath it is not a hand but a collection of joints misassembled, bones strung like beads on a rosary. It taps the glass. The sound doesn't come from the air. It detonates inside my skull. Once. Twice. With the third tap, my name writes itself into the condensation, not the name on my badge, but the one my grandmother whispered when I was a boy kneeling in her kitchen. My childhood nickname, traced in fog. The letters are shaky, clumsy, the way I used to write them. I feel humiliated, exposed, like something is rifling through my earliest shame. I whisper the Nicene Creed under my breath, half to steady myself, half to remind them, or me, that I still belong to something else. The figure curls back, amused. Then the case beside it clicks. The lock shears open without human hands and the glass mouth parts. Inside lies a book. Leather binding, but too soft, too warm, too pliant to be cowhide. A seven-pointed star glows on the cover, stamped deep, and below it, a single Latin word, apiary, open. The meaning strikes my muscles before my mind. My hand twitches toward the case, craving to lift it, to see the words inside. I grip my teeth until my jaw aches. I remind myself of the old Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the Vatican's forbidden book list. People mocked it for centuries, but now I understand. Prohibition is mercy, a fence around a cliff. Only men who fall curse fences. Retreat, step by trembling step, like a rabbit pretending stillness equals invisibility. But the corridor doesn't obey physics anymore. It stretches. Each step echoes wrong, heel second, toe first, as if I'm walking backwards even while moving forward. A bell tolls once. A single, damp note, the kind that marks a death. The guests rearrange themselves in my periphery with diplomatic patience, making room for whatever the bell summons. A current of rain slips through air that should be dry stone. I tell myself that if I survive the night, if I keep the first rule, this will end. It doesn't feel like truth. By the stairwell I falter. My eyelids close too long. Darkness slips through like a thief. Something presses folded parchment into my palm. I don't see the hand. I feel only warmth, fabric that drinks light, and then nothing. I unfold it because not unfolding it feels like a worse offense. The writing claws across the fibers. Regular secunda, respondia vetitum est vocibus domesticis. Do not answer voices that sound like your family. I test it within minutes. A woman's voice calls from the stairwell below, using the exact tone my mother used when she asked me to taste the sauce on Sundays. The cadence is perfect, the breath before the last syllable, the impatient affection woven through. "Honey," she calls, tender as a hand on my cheek. The ache in my chest is immediate. My body believes it. I almost answer. Only the sting of cold stone against my forehead keeps me silent. The voice shifts, laughs the way my mother used to, but there's something wrong in the timing. A second voice joins it, deeper, familiar in ways I can't bear. My father's hum. Together, they braid sound like a rope, pulling me toward the stairwell. I bite down on my tongue until I taste iron. I don't answer. The voices retreat upward instead of down, crawling along the ceiling, dragging the plaster until it bows. Dawn comes. It saves nothing. The gate stands almost closed, waiting for me to finish the job. I don't. The reliquary glass is dry, but my name still lingers inside me, carved into the nerves that shiver in my hands. The bookcase is empty, as though it never existed. The day guard arrives, signs the log, avoids my eyes. When I ask if the radio has been strange, he pretends not to hear, but his thumb sketches a trembling cross on his thigh. I step outside, and Rome looks wrong. The colors are too sharp, the sounds pitched half a tone higher, as though the world itself has been tuned to a new frequency. On the bus, my reflection breathes with me until we pass a church window. Then it delays by a beat, exhales when I inhale, and tilts its head toward a corner I refuse to see. I tell myself the rules aren't for tourists because tourists go home. These rules are for me, and now I know I've already been written into them. I didn't mean to read it aloud. That's the part I keep telling myself, the part I try to use as defense when I wake at 3 a.m. drenched in sweat. I only wanted to know what it said. I thought whispering the Latin would help me memorize it, maybe ground me, maybe keep me from imagining too much. But rules don't care about intent. And this one wasn't written to be spoken. It was written to bind. I broke that binding with a single word. The parchment felt heavier that night, as if each fold carried the weight of an anchor. I sat in the narrow security booth, a space barely wider than a confessional, and I unfolded the slip carefully, smoothing the creases with my thumb. The ink glistened faintly in the weak bulb above my head. Regula secunda, respondia vetitum est vocibus domesticis. I mouthed it once, then again. And then, without thinking, I spoke it. Quiet, a breath more than a word. My voice carried, even in the stale air. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. I didn't notice it at first. I thought the light had flickered or that a fuse had strained. But then the sound collapsed, all of it. The hum of the bulb, the distant drip of pipes, the faint shuffle of guards outside, it all cut out, like a curtain dropped across the senses. What remained was silence so total I thought my eardrums had ruptured. But no, my heartbeat still thudded, louder than it ever had, echoing through the booth, reverberating in the marble. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the silence was inside me. It pressed against my bones, my blood. That's when the voices began. At first it was a woman, soft, uncertain. Honey, my chest clenched. I knew that voice. It was my mother's, but she had been dead almost 15 years. The voice called again, warmer this time, as though coaxing me to taste something she was cooking. My eyes blurred. I wanted to believe. That was the danger. The voice wasn't a poor imitation. It was perfect. Every breath, every pause, every rhythm of my mother's speech had been stolen and replayed into the stillness. I shut my eyes and whispered, "You're not real." My voice sounded foreign in the silence, as though speaking underwater. The paper in my hand trembled. The ink seemed darker, almost wet. Then came another voice, deeper, steadier, my father. He died only 2 years ago. The grief was still raw enough that hearing him cracked me open in a way no prayer could stitch shut. Son, he said, just that, one word. But the way he said it carried decades of recognition. I could almost see him standing in the kitchen doorway, his hand on the frame, his tie loosened after work. Son. I should have kept silent. The second rule was clear. Do not answer voices that sound like your family. I had read it aloud. I had broken it already. But knowing and resisting are not the same thing. Grief makes fools of us all. My throat opened before my mind could stop it. Dad. The instant the word left me, the basilica groaned, not in metaphor, not in imagination. The stone itself shifted, as though the walls had inhaled. My security booth rattled against the floor, papers sliding to the ground, the bulbs swinging wildly. And then the silence deepened. I didn't know silence had levels until then, but it does. This was no longer absence of sound. This was sound inverted, collapsed, consumed. The door to the booth creaked open, though I hadn't touched it. I stared into the corridor beyond, and there, in the dim glow of the swinging light, shadows moved. Not human shadows, not cast by anything visible. They swam across the marble like oil slicks, darker than absence, deeper than night. Each one carried a voice. My aunt, my brother, my childhood friend, people alive, people dead, people I hadn't thought about in years, all calling, all begging me to come closer. I pressed myself into the corner, whispering Hail Marys with a tongue too dry to form the words. Ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostri. But the prayer dissolved. The voices overlapped until they weren't voices anymore, but a single chorus, pleading in every language I had ever known, and some I had never heard. They knew me. They spoke me. And worse, they knew the one weakness I couldn't defend against, the longing to see my dead again. I stumbled into the hall. I don't remember making the choice to leave the booth, but I must have, because my flashlight beam jerked across the walls and landed on something I can't erase from memory. One of the marble statues, the Madonna with child, had moved, not in posture, in expression. The infant's mouth was open wider than any infant could stretch, teeth serrated, jaw unhinged. My flashlight shook so badly the beam danced across the walls like lightning, and everywhere it touched, statues leaned closer, mouths cracked open, whispering in voices not their own. My mother's laugh echoed from one, my father's cough from another, my brother's childhood scream from a third. Their mouths didn't match the sounds. They hung open too wide, too still, but the voices poured out of them all the same. I backed away, but the parchment burned in my hand, and when I looked down, I saw a third fold loosen. Maury ink beneath, Maury words. I clutched it tighter, refusing to unfold it, refusing to let it reveal more. If I read another aloud, what else would I unleash? But the letters bled upward, seeping through the paper like oil through cloth, until I could see them without opening it. A third commandment waiting. I forced myself back into the booth, slammed the door, locked it. But locks don't mean anything in the basilica. They never did. The voices followed. The silence pressed tighter. My radio hissed to life for the first time in hours. A voice crackled through, low and urgent. Don't answer them. For God's sake, don't answer. I wanted to scream at the voice, demand who they were, how they knew, but the rule burned in me now. I had already broken it once. I wouldn't break it again. The rest of the night passed in fragments, time torn apart by silence, by whispers, by the smell of incense that wasn't burning. When the bells tolled dawn, the voices retreated, folding themselves back into the stone, into the shadows, into the statues that had never been still to begin with. When the day guard arrived, I nearly collapsed into his arms, desperate for confirmation that I wasn't insane. But he only looked at me with pity and muttered, "You read it, didn't you?" His eyes held no surprise, only grief. He didn't wait for my answer. He didn't need to. Now, days later, the voices follow me beyond the Vatican walls. I hear them in car horns, in air vents, in the sigh of strangers on buses. I hear my father humming at the grocery store, my mother laughing on the other end of phone lines that aren't connected. I don't answer anymore, but I know one slip was enough. I shouldn't have read the second rule aloud, because once you answer, the basilica doesn't stay in the basilica, it follows you home. I used to think the basilica belonged to the faithful, tourists snapping photos, nuns whispering prayers, priests filing through like veins carrying the lifeblood of tradition. But now I know it isn't theirs. The Vatican keeps its doors open by day to distract the world, to mask what comes at night. I learned that the night I followed the sound. The voices had been plaguing me ever since I broke the second rule. I heard them in empty stairwells, in broken radios, even in the rattle of loose windowpans. They used my family's words as bait, hooks baited with memory. But this night was different. There was no imitation of my father's voice, no whisper of my mother. Only the dull hum of chanting, steady and low, seeping from beneath the archive gate like smoke. The gate stood open wider now, wide enough to tempt even the most reluctant coward. Candles lined the floor in pairs, flickering as if carried by an unseen procession. My flashlight faltered when I aimed it inside, the beam shrinking against the dark as though light itself refused to trespass. My radio was dead. My breath clouded in front of me even though the night was warm. I told myself I'd look only long enough to confirm what I already knew, that no one should be here, that I could report it and leave. But that's the lie I've told myself every night. I always look longer than I should. I always stay. That's how the basilica keeps me. The chamber beyond the gate was vast, larger than I expected, stretching deeper, underground than the architecture should allow. The altar at its center was carved from black stone veined with red, like blood trapped in rock. Around it stood the guests, robes draped to the floor, faces hooded in shadow, bodies elongated by flickering candlelight. They moved in silence, a silence so complete it seemed they were communicating without sound, each gesture carrying volumes of unspoken command. Then one by one they laid offerings upon the altar, not bread, not wine, wrapped bundles bound in cloth that bled through. My stomach churned even before one of them peeled the fabric back. What lay inside was a throat, not severed neatly, not embalmed, but fresh, the flesh still twitching as if life hadn't yet admitted defeat. The larynx convulsed, gagged, gasped for air it couldn't pull in. I had never thought of a throat as something independent of the body until that moment, and now I'll never forget it. The guests leaned closer, as though admiring the artistry of the cut. One of them plucked the throat up delicately, like a man lifting bread from a basket, and pressed it to the hollow where his own mouth should be. The sound that followed was not chewing. It was inhalation, a long, deep intake, as though he were pulling the last breath out of lungs no longer attached. The throat shriveled instantly, collapsing like parchment to ash, and was discarded to the floor. Another bundle followed. Another gasp, another inhalation. Each throat offered seemed to scream silently as its final air was stolen. I pressed myself against the wall, desperate to turn away. But the third slip of parchment had already burned itself into my hand earlier that evening, its words etched into my skin like a brand. Do not accept the meal. I thought that meant refusing bread, refusing wine. I was wrong. A guest turned, robe trailing as if it had soaked up centuries of dust. In its hand it held a bundle smaller than the others. When it unwrapped it, I saw something that made bile rise hot in my throat. A child's throat, delicate, pale, still pulsing with a final rhythm. The guest cradled it reverently, then stretched its arm toward me, toward me. The hood fell back just enough to reveal the void where a face should be, an abyss ringed by jagged teeth that glistened wet in the candlelight. From that abyss came a voice, not in sound, but inside my head. It was Latin, it wasn't any human language, but the meaning was clear: eat. I shook my head violently, clutching my rosary so hard the beads cut into my palm. No, I whispered, my voice cracked raw. No. The guest's hand remained outstretched. The throat writhed in its palm, gasping like a fish yanked from water, making small, desperate sounds that weren't words but carried the weight of pleading. My stomach turned, my vision blurred, and I knew with bone-deep certainty that if I reached out, if I touched it, it would fuse to me. It would become mine, and I would never stop hearing its cries. I backed away, step by step, but the chamber warped with my retreat. Every step stretched the distance forward instead of back. The altar loomed closer, the guests taller, the offerings more grotesque. Bundles split open on the stone, revealing not just throats but tongues, hands, even eyes that blinked wetly before being consumed. The smell was unbearable, like copper and incense rotting together, a feast for gods who had long since abandoned heaven. The guest holding the child's throat lowered it slowly, almost disappointed. Then, with a gesture sharp as a blade, it hurled the bundle to the ground at my feet. It landed wet, twitching, gasping, spraying flecks of blood across my boots. I staggered back, nearly slipped, and when I looked up again, the guests had all turned their hoods toward me. 100 voids, 100 mouths, all inhaling in unison. The sound rattled my bones. I ran. I don't remember how I reached the gate. I don't remember how I cleared the stairs or shoved my way into the main hall. All I remember is the breath, the sound of 100 mouths drawing in, not exhaling, as though they were pulling not air but memory, identity, soul. I burst into the open air outside the basilica and vomited onto the stones, shaking, the rosary still biting into my palm. When I looked at my hand, the third rule had darkened across my skin, etched like a tattoo. Do not accept the meal. I had obeyed, barely, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a reprieve, a delay in an execution already signed. And still, when I close my eyes, I see it, that bundle on the ground, that throat gasping, begging. Some nights I hear it still, beneath the sound of my own breath. A smaller, desperate rhythm, one that doesn't belong to me. I saw what they eat, and now every breath I take feels borrowed, as though they left me alive only because one day they'll come to collect it back. I had always thought faith was armor, that symbols, the cross, the rosary, the candle flame, were weapons against whatever darkness slithered unseen. That night stripped me of that comfort forever. Faith here wasn't armor, it was currency, and the debt collectors had come. The third rule had already scarred itself into my hand. Do not accept the meal. The ink felt hot against my skin, like it was seared into my flesh by something older than fire. I told myself I had resisted, that I had survived. But survival isn't escape. The basilica doesn't let you leave once it's tasted your fear. The archive wing was sealed again when I returned for the next shift, the iron gate chained shut. I almost believed I had imagined it all, the feasting, the throats, the voices. But the stains remained, wax trails on the marble, a smear of blood dried into rust along my boots. The basilica doesn't clean itself. That night, I decided I would cling to the only things left that felt holy. The crucifixes that lined the walls, the relics that hung above doors, the symbols carved into marble and wood, reminders that whatever horror lingered in these halls, the church still stood. But I noticed it as soon as I stepped into the nave. The first cross I passed wasn't upright. It dangled inverted, its shadow spilling long and wrong across the floor. I stopped cold, staring. I had walked this hall dozens of times. I knew how the symbols were hung. The cross had been upright yesterday. Now it was flipped. At first I thought maybe it had been tampered with, that someone had turned it as a prank or blasphemy. But as I walked deeper, more appeared. Every crucifix, every cross in the closed corridors, hung inverted. Not nailed crooked, not fallen from age, but deliberately reversed, as though the very nails that fixed them to the walls had rotated in their sockets. I gripped my rosary, whispering prayers through clenched teeth, but even the beads felt wrong in my hand, their surface hot, slick with something like sweat. The air was heavy, coppery, like a forge burning beneath the basilica. The parchment in my pocket stirred. I pulled it out, and to my horror, the ink had shifted. The letters crawled across the fibers, rearranging themselves into a sentence I hadn't read before. Never touch the symbols during the Mass. That was the fourth rule, and I was standing in a hall lined with symbols I suddenly couldn't avoid. The candles lit themselves then. One by one, along the nave, flames bloomed on every wick, bathing the inverted crosses in red glow. The shadows they cast didn't point toward the walls but toward me. Every single one stretched long and bent, converging on where I stood. It was like being caught in a net made of darkness. I froze, my flashlight sputtered, then died. My radio hissed once and went silent. I was alone in the glow of those flames, the heat rising, the shadows pressing in. And then I heard it, a chant, deep and guttural, vibrating through the stone. Not Latin. Something older, the syllables scraping like bone against bone. The guests emerged from the shadows, hooded, robed, moving in unison. They didn't walk so much as slide, their garments trailing like smoke. They formed a circle around me, and every inverted cross began to pulse with light, brighter, hotter, until the air shimmered. My skin prickled as though I stood too close to a furnace. I backed away, my shoulder colliding with one of the crosses fixed to the wall. The metal burned instantly. Pain seared through me, hot and electric, dropping me to my knees. I bit back a scream, but my flesh sizzled where it touched the inverted symbol. The smell of it, my own skin burning, made me gag. The robed figures didn't move to help. They leaned closer, their voided faces tilting as though fascinated by the sight. One reached out, a skeletal hand emerging from its sleeve, and traced the air above my wound. The skin split wider as if cut by an invisible blade. Blood poured down my arm, dripping onto the marble. The inverted cross beneath me drank it. The stone blackened, and the shadow at my feet writhed, detaching from my body. I staggered back, clutching my arm. My shadow remained pinned to the wall, crucified against the inverted symbol, nailed by something unseen. Its mouth opened. I didn't open mine, but it screamed for me, a sound so piercing it rattled the statues in their alcoves. Their stone faces cracked, and from those cracks poured whispers in every voice I had ever known. The chanting grew louder. The guests encircled me tighter, their robes brushing my skin, their voided faces hovering close enough that I felt cold air spilling from them. My rosary beads snapped in my hand, scattering across the floor. Each bead rolled into a shadow and vanished. Desperate, I pressed my forehead to the ground, whispering every prayer I remembered from childhood. But the basilica wasn't listening. The inverted crosses burned brighter, the heat blistering my skin. My pinned shadow writhed harder, screaming, twisting its head in ways mine couldn't. And then, impossibly, it looked at me. My shadow looked at me. Its eyes, hollow pits of black flame, locked onto mine. And in its scream, I heard words, "Stay." I lunged forward, ripping myself from the circle. The guests didn't stop me. They didn't need to. My wound burned, my shadow remained pinned, and the fourth rule carved itself into my flesh, joining the others. Never touch the symbols during the Mass. I stumbled into the night air, my arm seared, my rosary gone, my shadow still nailed to that wall. The moon cast no outline for me. I walked home without it, a man stripped of the one thing that proved he still belonged to light. I have avoided mirrors ever since. When I risk a glance, my reflection is there, but it's hollow, empty where the shadow should be. And sometimes, when the room is quiet, I hear faint nails being hammered, again and again, as though somewhere deep beneath the basilica, my shadow is still screaming. The crosses were hung upside down for a reason, because here they don't point to salvation, they point to me. I thought the worst had already happened. I thought I had seen enough to understand the depth of the basilica's night rituals, the feasts, the rules, the crosses inverted to draw blood instead of blessing. But the basilica keeps no ceiling on horror. Each night peels back another layer, each rule unfolds into something deeper. That night began with the organ. It was faint at first, a single low note vibrating through the stone like a heartbeat. I had never heard the organ played at night. It should have been locked, its pipes sealed, its keys untouched. But the sound carried from the nave, swelling, building into a hymn that was almost familiar, almost, but wrong. The melody twisted midway, notes bending into dissonance, harmonies that scraped bone instead of soothing it. It was a song meant to gather. And gather they did. I stepped into the nave and froze. The guests were already assembled, more of them than I had seen before. Their robes filled the pews, their shadows stretched long across the marble floor, bending against the grain of light. They faced the altar, their hoods low, bodies swaying with the music as though caught in a tide. My flashlight flickered once, then died, leaving me in the glow of hundreds of candles. The air reeked of incense, thick and cloying, but beneath it was another smell, sweet, metallic, unmistakable. Blood. At first I thought they hadn't noticed me. I crept along the far wall, clinging to shadow, trying to find an exit. But then the organ hit a higher register, and in perfect unison, every hooded head turned toward me. I stopped breathing. The music continued, the pipes howling with a sound that belonged more to wind in catacombs than human fingers. The guests rose, their robes rustling like wings. One by one, they reached up, grasped the edges of their hoods, and pulled them back. I wish they hadn't. Faces shouldn't look like that. Skin stretched too thin, pulled taut over jaws that hung too wide, teeth jagged and wet. Some had no skin at all, only sockets where eyes should have been, pits so deep they seemed to fall into another world. Their mouths twitched in jerks, snapping like animals testing a cage. And then, slowly, they smiled, every single one of them. The sight rooted me to the ground. That many smiles, all aimed at me, not in welcome but in recognition, as though they had been waiting, as though I was late. My radio, long dead, crackled suddenly at my belt. A voice hissed through, urgent, desperate. "If they smile at you, run." I jolted, fumbling for the device, whispering, "Who are you?" But the static swallowed the response, leaving me with nothing but the echo of my own fear. The guests began to move, not toward the altar, not toward each other, toward me. Their steps were slow, deliberate, robes dragging, hands twitching as if tasting the air. I backed away, stumbling over the marble tiles, my breath loud enough to betray me. I sprinted for the side door, the one I had passed 100 times during patrols. My badge fumbled against the lock. Nothing. The reader flashed red, unyielding. I tried again, harder, slamming the badge against it until my hand bled. The door didn't budge. The basilica wasn't going to let me out. The organ swelled louder, each note vibrating through my bones. The guests moved faster now, their smiles wider, their steps in unison. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned down another hall, then another, trying doors, windows, even vents. every exit sealed. Every passage curved back into the nave, funneling me toward the altar like prey into a snare. I collapsed against a column, clutching my burned arm, whispering, "Why me? Why me?" as though the walls might answer. And maybe they did, because the parchment slipped loose from my pocket again. Another fold undone. Another rule revealed. Do not stay after the bells toll 3 times. But the bells hadn't rung yet, and already I was trapped. The guests closed in, their smiles fixed, their eyes or their pits, never leaving me. One reached out, its hands skeletal but slick with something darker. The fingertip brushed my sleeve, and every muscle in my arm locked. Cold surged through me, freezing my breath, making my teeth chatter. My vision blurred with spots of red and gold. I wrenched free, but the chill stayed, gnawing at my veins. The organ cut off suddenly, the silence more violent than the sound. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. And then the guest spoke. Not aloud, inside me. The words poured into my head, overlapping, hundreds of voices whispering the same thing. You are not one of us, but you will be. I screamed, clutching my skull, pounding it against the column to drive the voices out. But the whispers sank deeper, curling into places prayer couldn't reach. Every memory, every secret regret, every shame. I felt them rifling through me, cataloguing me, twisting me into something they could use. I staggered forward, desperate for escape, when I saw it, the shadow of my own body, cast against the altar wall. Only it wasn't mine anymore. It smiled, wide and grotesque, even though my face was frozen in terror. Its arms lifted, mirroring me, but slower, more deliberate, as though it was practicing how to wear me. The guests parted, leaving a path to the altar. My shadow gestured toward it, beckoning. The invitation wasn't one I could refuse. My legs moved despite me, each step dragging me closer to the black stone. The closer I came, the hotter the air grew, the more my lungs burned as though I was breathing embers. And then, mercifully or cruelly, the bells tolled once. A deep, cavernous note that shook the basilica. The guests stilled, their smiles widened. The parchment in my hand flared with heat, searing my skin with a reminder of the 5th rule. Do not stay after the bells toll 3 times. I have one chance left, I told myself. One chance to find an exit, one chance to disobey whatever force was herding me. But the basilica has no mercy, and the guests are patient. They know I'm not one of them, and they know I have nowhere else to go. They smiled because they recognized me, not as prey, but as something waiting to change. The bells never rang at night. Not in all my shifts, not in all the whispered superstitions traded between guards. Bells were for morning mass, for funerals, for ritual, not for midnight. So when the parchment burned a 5th warning into my skin, I prayed it was a bluff, some cruel trick of the basilica. But the basilica does not bluff. The first toll came like thunder rolled through stone. The sound didn't travel from the tower above. It rose from beneath my feet, deep in the catacombs, shaking the marble tiles loose. Dust cascaded from the vaulted ceiling, and the guests all froze mid-step, their smiles locked, their bodies stiff. Every hooded head tilted upward, listening. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound wasn't outside me. It was inside, vibrating bone and blood, rattling my teeth, my vision blurred. For a heartbeat, I thought I might faint, but fainting here meant death. I staggered toward the side door, praying it would open this time, praying the parchment's warning still allowed escape. My badge trembled in my bloody fingers as I slammed it against the reader. Nothing. The red light blinked, steady and merciless. Behind me, I heard robes stirring, 100 figures shifting in unison. The bells hadn't finished. The second toll struck. Louder, heavier. The sound cracked across the basilica like a whip, sending a shudder through every cross, every relic, every piece of stone. The inverted crucifixes flared red-hot, glowing as though fresh from a forge. My burned arm screamed in response, flesh blistering, scar reopening. The air itself pulsed, as though breathing with the sound, pulling me toward the altar. The guests moved again, closer this time. Their smiles were wider, impossibly wide, lips splitting, skin tearing. Black fluid dripped from their mouths, sizzling when it struck the marble. The chanting began not out loud, not with mouths, but inside my skull. Words layered over one another, incomprehensible, yet carrying meaning I didn't want. The third is for you. The third is for us. I ran. I don't remember choosing where, only that my body knew corridors my mind didn't. I turned corners that shouldn't exist, found myself in stairwells that seemed to sink deeper instead of climbing up. My flashlight was dead. My radio hissed only with laughter that wasn't laughter, but a chorus of teeth grinding. The basilica rearranged itself, herding me like an animal into its throat. I burst into the nave again, the altar looming, the guests forming ranks along the pews. The organ groaned to life, belching a single sustained note that vibrated the air into distortion. My chest ached with every breath. My shadow stretched ahead of me, moving faster than I did, dragging me toward the altar with every flicker of candlelight. The third toll came. It wasn't sound, it was a collapse. The world seemed to fold inward, as though space itself was punctured. The guests lifted their arms in unison, every hood falling back to reveal their hollow faces, their pit eyes, their tearing jaws. And all at once, they turned toward me. The parchment in my hand burst into flame, burning to ash that fell through my fingers. But the words seared into my flesh remained. Do not stay after the bells toll 3 times. I had stayed. The rule was broken. The doors slammed shut one by one, chains rattling across them without visible hands. Windows blackened, stained glass twisting into images I had never seen before. Saints with their mouths sewn shut, martyrs smiling as their throats were cut, Christ inverted, arms stretched not in mercy but in welcome. The whole basilica groaned as though it was alive, as though I was no longer inside a building but a stomach. The guests advanced. Their chanting drilled into my skull, peeling away language, thought, reason. I dropped to my knees, clawing at my ears, whispering prayers that fell apart on my tongue. I begged God, the saints, anyone listening. But the only response was laughter, raw and wet, pouring from every hollow mouth. I tried to crawl, to drag myself toward a side aisle, but the marble rippled like water beneath me, sucking me back toward the altar. My hands left streaks of blood on the floor as my nails tore away. My reflection in the slick surface smiled even as I sobbed. The altar flared with light, black stone veined with fire, and I understood. The bells weren't warnings. They were invitations. I hadn't broken the rule by staying. I had fulfilled it. The bells were for me. They had always been for me. A shadow detached from my feet again, taller now, more solid, more eager. It smiled my smile, lifted its hands in prayer I hadn't made. The guests parted to let it walk forward, treating it as kin, while I was left groveling in the blood-slick marble. I realized then, they weren't waiting for me to join them. They were waiting for me to become what they had already seen. My shadow climbed the steps of the altar, turned once to look back at me, and tilted its head in mockery. Then it knelt, and the void opened in its chest, ready to be filled. The organ screamed, the guests exhaled as one, and I knew the basilica had claimed me. The fifth rule wasn't written to save me. It was written to make sure I stayed long enough for them to finish remaking me. Morning light in Rome should feel safe. It's supposed to cut through shadow, to remind you of the world outside. The cafes opening, tourists spilling into plazas, bells ringing for ordinary mass. But when the first rays filtered through the stained glass of the basilica, I felt no relief. The colors painted across the marble weren't warm. They looked like wounds, reds too wet, blues too deep, yellows too jaundiced. I sat there trembling on the floor, my fingernails torn, my arm blistered, my shadow gone, and for a fleeting moment I thought I had survived. That illusion lasted only until the priests came in. The side doors opened, and the familiar rustle of robes swept across the nave. 5 of them walked in, white vestments gleaming in the fractured morning light. Their footsteps were measured, deliberate, echoing with the kind of authority you're supposed to trust. They looked like priests, faces stern, hands folded, eyes lowered in piety. My heart lurched with relief so sharp it almost hurt. I nearly wept. I wasn't alone anymore. "Help me," I rasped, staggering toward them. My voice cracked like broken glass. My burned arm hung limp at my side, my knees buckling. They turned their heads toward me in perfect unison, their expressions blank. For a moment, I believed they were stunned, maybe horrified by my state. Then one of them stepped forward. He laid his hand on my shoulder. It was warm, too warm, the heat searing through fabric into flesh. I looked up into his face and saw it. The jawline that didn't end where it should, the faint outline of teeth pressing against skin from beneath, and the eyes. God help me, the eyes. At first glance they looked human, brown, steady. But when the light caught them, the irises disappeared. What stared back at me were pits, deep and bottomless, the same voids I had seen beneath the hoods of the guests. My relief died in my throat. I stumbled back, whispering, "No, no, no." My voice sounded like a child's, weak and panicked. The priest smiled, not with lips, not with teeth, but with something beneath the skin stretching into an expression his face couldn't contain. The others approached, their steps synchronized. I realized then that the Vatican wasn't guarding humanity against them. It was protecting them from us. These weren't infiltrators. These weren't outsiders breaking into holy ground. They belonged here. The basilica was theirs, always had been. I bolted for the main doors, sunlight blazing beyond them. If I could just reach daylight, I told myself I'd be safe. I sprinted across the nave, my boots slipping on blood-slick marble, my lungs heaving. My hands slammed against the iron bars, only to find them locked tight, chains crisscrossed, bolts sealed. Daylight streamed through, but it was unreachable, a painting instead of an escape. Behind me, the priests continued their slow advance. One lifted a hand, fingers long, joints bending backward. He murmured something in Latin, but the syllables twisted halfway, becoming sounds that didn't belong to any human mouth. The air thickened. The stained glass above shuddered, the images rearranging themselves into scenes I had never seen before. Saints burning alive without crying out, angels with their wings torn off, martyrs smiling as their skin peeled away. I pressed my forehead against the locked door, sobbing, whispering prayers I no longer believed would be heard. The marble trembled beneath me. The organ groaned again, one long, sustained note that vibrated through my chest like a second heartbeat. When I turned, I saw the truth. The priests weren't men at all. Their robes rippled as though something inside them shifted constantly, unable to hold still. Faces stretched, cracked, healed, and split again, as if skin was just a mask barely holding back what waited underneath. And when they opened their mouths to chant, the sound wasn't voices. It was wind through bone, air forced through broken flutes. My stomach twisted until bile burned my throat. They weren't priests, they were caretakers, shepherds of the guests. The ones who led the rituals, who set the rules, who ensured the feast continued undisturbed. The Vatican wasn't keeping these things out of the world. It was keeping them in, feeding them, worshipping them, binding them with rules as old as Scripture. The one who had touched my shoulder stepped closer. His face melted at the edges, features dripping like wax until only the void remained. He leaned down, so close I felt the heat of him against my skin, and whispered inside my head, "You are already part of the Mass." I screamed and shoved him away. My burned arm brushed his robe, and the fabric clung to me like tar, searing new blisters into my flesh. I clawed it off, tearing skin with it, shrieking as my blood spattered across the marble. The priests didn't flinch. They watched, smiling with their too wide mouths, their eyes pits of endless black. The bells rang again, not three this time, not warning. A dozen tolls, one after another, each louder than the last. The sound shattered glass, cracked stone, split the air into jagged silence. With each strike my body convulsed, my vision blacked at the edges. My ears bled. The priests didn't move. They stood still, absorbing the sound like it was nourishment. When the last toll faded, the silence that followed was worse. Heavy, absolute. The priests lowered their heads and stepped aside, parting like curtains. And beyond them, in the shadows of the altar, the guests waited. Dozens of them, hundreds, smiling, waiting. I realized then that there was no leaving, no survival. I had been let in, tested, marked. The rules hadn't been warnings, they had been instructions, steps of a ritual older than the basilica itself. And by obeying and breaking them, I had already played my part. I fell to my knees, my forehead against the marble, begging for it to end. But the priests only circled closer, their robes brushing against me, their voices murmuring in that impossible language. And in the silence between words, I heard the truth. I hadn't been guarding the basilica. The basilica had been guarding me until I was ready. The priests aren't priests, they are wardens, and now that they know I've seen them, I don't think they'll ever let me go. I tell HR I'm done. The woman behind the desk signs the form with a fountain pen that leaks brown ink like old blood, and says it. Understandable, given the stress of night work, and would I consider a rotation to daytime guest control? I shake my head because there isn't a daytime for what I've seen. She clicks my badge on a lanyard, frowns at the photo because it doesn't quite look like me anymore, angles wrong, eyes too hollow, and then she says something I can't get out of my head. You can leave the uniform. The badge you keep for clearance until the week closes. Until the week closes, as if a week can close like a door. I should have argued, insisted she cut it in half, drop it in acid, file a report. Instead, I pocket it. I should have stopped then, but I keep reading the world like it's a set of instructions written in a language that's already inside me. The first night home, I hide the badge in a bowl with keys and coins and a rosary that still smells faintly of my grandmother's hands. I take a shower so hot my burned arm lividly protests and steam coils from the tile in ribbons that look too deliberate. When I wipe the mirror, my reflection exhales a beat after I do, as if it's catching up from somewhere farther away. I sleep in fits that don't deserve the name. I dream of a hallway paved with ribs like white stones, my boots tapping each one, the sound traveling down into something that answers from beneath with patient breath. I wake at 3:07 a.m. standing barefoot in the corridor outside my apartment, badge pressed so hard into my palm the edge has cut a crescent into skin. The building's motion lights glow the color of candle flame. My door is open. Inside, the TV shows a frozen frame of the Vatican live feed, no audio, just the camera's unblinking stare. I don't remember turning anything on. I don't remember leaving the bed. I should have called someone. But who do you call when the thing that haunts you has a peril office? In the morning, I try to break the badge. I bend it. It resists. I score it with a box cutter until the blade snaps and the plastic barely scuffs. I heat the edge of a knife and press it to the magnetic stripe. The stripe darkens and then renews like skin knitting shut. I take it down to the Tiber and throw it as far as I can manage, a spiral that flashes once in the sun and vanishes with a sound too soft for what I feel. I feel relief for the length of a breath. I go home, open the door, and there it is on the entry table on top of my mail, beading with condensation as if it has been somewhere damp and much, much colder. The stripe smells faintly of incense. The plastic feels warm. The photo looks a little more like me and a little less at the same time. Rome begins to recognize me like a password. The metro turnstile light goes green when I pass, even if I don't tap. Elevator doors open before I press the button. Automatic doors at the supermarket hiss aside when I'm still 2 steps away, and the security cameras inside pivot a fraction to follow me, lenses dilating with a hunger I've only ever seen in living eyes. A child in line stares at the lanyard clip peeking from my pocket and asks his mother if angels wear keys. His mother shushes him too quickly, like someone who knows the answer and can't bear the weight of saying it aloud. I keep telling myself the badge is just plastic, but when I set it on the kitchen table and walk into the other room, I hear the faintest tapping, tap, 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 a rhythm matched to the organ's lowest pedal note. When I come back, the badge has rotated a quarter turn to face the door. I go to a small parish across the river to light a candle because some old part of me thinks fire and wax can mark a boundary the night respects. The church is closed. The sacristan shrugs and says the priest is at the hospital and points me toward the main basilica with an apology that doesn't touch his eyes. I walk anyway, out of stubbornness, out of the need to prove I still can. When I pass St. Mary's, the big doors are chained, but they slip a link to let me through. Not for anyone else, just me. I don't go in. I stand trembling on the steps and realize the city isn't a map anymore. It's a set of veins, and the badge is how the basilica draws blood from distance. I tell myself I won't go back. I tell myself I will take a train to anywhere that is Rome and burn the lanyard in a field, bury the ash in a mason jar, drop the jar in a lake. But I wake 2 mornings later in the square, the big colonnades throwing a hush over the pavement, the badge warm in my palm and the taste of wax in my mouth. The Swiss Guard are posted, bright and precise, and they don't see me. Or maybe they see me and have been taught not to look. That is worse. The entrance reader blinks red for a tour group, then blinks green when I lift my hand, hungry little diode that it is. The inside light shifts the way a living thing shifts when it senses food. I don't step over the threshold, but the air presses against me like a chest exhaling, and it feels personal. I should have left the country. Instead, I go to the security desk because habit has more gravity than fear. The sergeant isn't the sergeant who stamped my log on those first nights. This one is older, cheeks sunken as if picked clean by time, eyes watery but fixed on a point over my shoulder where my shadow ought to be. He doesn't ask why I'm here. He slides the logbook across the counter as if there's nothing unusual about me in street clothes, and the page is already filled with my name, written in a hand that slants too steeply toward the margins. The hour next to it is time-stamped before dawn. Present, I didn't sign it. I didn't touch the pen. He pushes a sealed envelope to me. The wax is black. The stamp is the 7-pointed star I saw on the book in the case. They said you'd come, he murmurs like a man talking in his sleep. They said your clearance is internal now. Internal. The word settles into me like a seed that has always been there, only now watered. I don't open the envelope. I put it in my pocket and feel its heat low against my thigh as I take the long way home. I pass a butcher shop, and the tray of tracheas in the case makes my stomach clench with a shame that belongs to a different night. I pass a window display of crucifixes, and all of them tilt imperceptibly, a chorus of small betrayals. On a side street, a woman tells rosary beads with fingers so fast they blur. The sound is like rain on bone. A stray cat arches, fur standing, and stares not at me, but at the space where my shadow ought to stitch to the pavement. It hisses. It runs. The envelope sits on my table like a second heartbeat. When I finally break the wax, there's no letter, just another slip of parchment, smaller than the others, delicate as a scab. No rule, no Latin. A single line in cramped ink, Aperia non opus est ubi eam apertus ease. You don't need to open a door that is already open. I laugh because the alternative is crying, and the laughter doesn't sound like me. It sounds like air moving through a pipe that's been split down the middle. I tape the slip to the underside of a drawer as if hiding it will blunt its meaning. It doesn't. All night, my apartment doors unlock and relock by themselves with the careful politeness of a host checking on a sleeping guest. People say obsessions are circular, that you walk the same mental loop until the floor is a groove. Mine is a spiral that goes down. I find wax beneath my nails in the morning and ash on my pillowcase, as if I lay my head in a dish of extinguished candles. The radio in my kitchen hisses to life, a voice whispering 2 words between static, Veni manner, come stay. I unplug it. It keeps talking for a while because electricity is only one kind of permission. I stack furniture against my door and wake to find the furniture gently moved aside in a configuration that makes a cross if you squint and tilt your head the way they taught us not to. My phone fills with draft texts to numbers not in my contacts. Are you there? I didn't type them. The typing bar dances anyway, a little organ key moving under a hand I can't see. I tell myself I'll return the badge during daylight so whatever sees me at night can't pretend I belong to it. I walk at noon because the sun is supposed to be safe. It is bright. It does not cast an outline for me. Inside the security vestibule, the reader light is a patient green. I hold the badge out flat like a surrender flag, but the door doesn't need the gesture. It slides open an inch, a breath, the way a mouth might when it recognizes a taste. The cool of the basilica comes through the gap, the particular stone-sweet chill I'd know blindfolded. Behind the second set of doors, I hear the organ clear its throat. Somewhere far below that, I hear the wet slide of 100 chairs being pulled back from a table, an ushering in sound. There's a moment where I could turn and run and make it stick. I know that. If I sprinted hard enough and fast enough, I could be on a street full of loud human things. Scooters whining, vendors shouting, a man dropping oranges that bounce away like small suns. I could buy a ticket and sit with my knees crammed against a seat back, and pretend the relief of distance is safety. But distance is just the space between the bell and the ear, and the bells are in me now. The badge is just a talisman for a lock they've already installed behind my ribs. The door isn't a door. It's a recognition handshake inside my blood. I slide the plastic toward the reader and stop with it hovering, a breath away. The LED is already green. The sensor chirps once, the tender, obscene sound a welcoming thing makes when it identifies its own. The envelope slip rustles in my pocket, even though I taped it away hours ago. The air from the seam between doors is cool and smells of stone, wax, and a sweetness I can't name that feels like the exact midpoint between sacrament and rot. I stand there breathing it, like a man starved of either. I think of the rules, and how I treated them like fences when they were actually escalators. I think of that first night when I told myself I was only guarding empty halls. I think of my shadow, nailed to a wall I won't admit is an altar. And then I think of the way every lock in my life has been turning toward me lately, not against me, aligning teeth to the key my fear has ground me into. I should have thrown the badge away the same night they offered me the job. I should have never taken the job. I should have never needed the money. I should have stopped when the mirror wrote warnings in steam. But I kept reading. I keep reading. I hold my hand out as if I'm about to knock, even though I know it's a formality. The worst part is that my badge still opens the door. It's that the door keeps opening even when my hand isn't there. When I first found the parchment, I thought of it as a warning. I clung to the idea that the rules were safety nets, ways to dodge what lurked in the basilica after hours. Now at the end, I understand. The rules weren't fences. They were doors. And breaking them didn't set me free. It walked me deeper in. Each one I broke carved me closer into their likeness, like marble chipped into shape by patient, unseen hands. Rule 1. Do not look directly at the guests. I looked. I stared into hollows that weren't eyes and smiles that weren't mouths. I saw the shape of what feasts where no one should, and they saw me back. In that moment, the thread was tied. Sight is a covenant, and I signed it. Rule 2. Do not answer voices that sound like your family. I answered. I said my father's name into silence, and silence gave him back to me for an instant, distorted, borrowed. When you answer the basilica, you don't get memory. You get a hook sunk deep. I hear those voices still, in air vents, in recordings, in the pauses of strangers on the street. They follow me like hounds, trained and hungry. Rule 3. Do not accept the meal. I thought I resisted. I told myself I refused when they offered the throat, when they pressed the gasping bundle toward me. But refusal isn't innocence. Refusal is recognition. And when the blood sprayed across my boots, when the smell of copper and incense filled my lungs, something inside me swallowed anyway. I taste it still, in bread, in water, in the back of my tongue when I try to pray. Rule 4. Never touch the symbols during the Mass. My shoulder brushed the inverted cross, and my skin burned, and my shadow was crucified against stone. I thought I escaped, but I walk without a shadow now. Every reflection I see smiles before I do. Every glass surface carries a lag, a delay, like something else is learning how to use my body in its absence. Rule 5. Do not stay after the bells toll 3 times. I stayed. I heard the bells, and I let the basilica's lungs breathe me in. The bells weren't warnings, they were invitations. By the 3rd toll, my shadow was kneeling at the altar, and the guests opened their arms as though greeting kin. The basilica claimed me in that moment. Everything since has just been formalities. I broke them all. Not in one night, not in one act, but slowly, step by step, like beads on a rosary, each one a prayer turned inward. The parchment burned away, but its script burns in me now. My veins feel inked. My bones ring when the bells toll, even miles away. The badge still works. The doors still open. My shadow still prays on its own. I resigned, but the basilica didn't release me. It followed me home. Candles sputter to life in my apartment when I wake at 3 a.m., though I don't own candles anymore. Mirrors write rules in steam I never lit. My neighbors don't meet my eyes in the hall. When I force them to, I see a flicker, a second image overlaid. Hooded robes, hollow pits. I think the basilica is everywhere now, a web threaded through every place faith has ever touched. My badge is just a reminder, a trinket to keep me tethered. Sometimes I wonder if this is what the Vatican always meant by custodianship. Maybe every guard before me read the slips, broke the rules, and dissolved into the mass, their names struck from perils but written deeper somewhere else. Maybe I wasn't chosen. Maybe I was next in line. I don't know what's worse, that I was deceived or that I deceived myself. I should have stopped when the first candle burned where no priest walked. I should have stopped when I heard my mother's voice in the stairwell. I should have stopped when the child's throat gasped at my feet. But I kept reading, kept answering, kept staying. Curiosity isn't a virtue here, it's consent. The bells toll now without pattern, not 3, not 12, sometimes 1. Sometimes a roll of them spilling through the air like stones dropped into water. I don't hear them with my ears anymore. I feel them in my teeth, in the marrow of my blistered arm, in the pause between breaths when the air is still. Each toll pulls me closer, bending my spine, dragging my knees toward the floor. And each time I resist, it feels weaker, more symbolic, like pretending to fight when you've already surrendered. I write this not to warn you. Warnings don't work. Warnings only tempt. I write this because confession is all I have left, and maybe confession is what they want. Maybe every word I put down feeds them. Maybe you reading this right now is part of the mass. If so, forgive me. Or don't. Forgiveness is meaningless where I'm going. There's one sound I can't ignore anymore. A scratching at my window at night, rhythmic, like nails dragging on glass. I live on the 4th floor. There's no ledge, no tree, nothing that should reach me here. And yet when I dare to look, I see shapes in the reflection that aren't mine, hooded heads bending closer, smiles stretched too wide. They don't knock. They don't need to. They already have the key. And the badge, God, the badge, I can't bring myself to destroy it. I think it would destroy me first. Sometimes it pulses against my chest like a second heart. Sometimes it's cold as stone. But always, always, when I press it to any lock, the light turns green. The world wants me to open doors. The basilica wants me to walk through them. The parchment's gone, but I feel a 6th rule curling at the edges of my mind, waiting for me to break it. Maybe it says, do not write it down. Maybe it says, do not share it. And if that's true, then this chapter isn't just confession, it's transgression, which means you're part of it now, too. I don't know if you can hear it where you are, but the bells are tolling again. I broke all 5 rules, and the basilica still isn't finished with me. So tell me, will you break the 6th just by listening?